most honest practice happens nowhere near a yoga mat. It's in the inbox that won't quit, the mirror we'd rather avoid, the family stories that we carry in our bones. Today on the Mindful Journey podcast, listeners, I am Sana and we are getting real about mindfulness of the mat. Breath as boundary, presence as power, and compassion that actually holds in hard moments. Our guest discovered yoga while thriving in NYC hustle mode, running a theater company, living on $1 slices, navigating vitiligo, and carrying generational trauma as the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. Hurricane Sandy cracked the city open, and something opened in her too. Since then, she's led global retreats, written Shine On and Off the Mat, and built the Shine community, reminding people that growth isn't about perfect conditions, it is about showing up as we are. So, let's all breathe together and begin. So, listeners, meet my lovely guest, Veronique Ory. So, Veronique, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really honored to have you here with us.
Thank you so much, Sana. So happy to be here.
Veronique, um, so right now we are actually, I think if I can personally say that we are definitely in some challenging times. However, I think there's also kind of silver lining in the cloud that we are seeing people coming out and talking openly about their struggles, like genuine, raw, real struggles. But then there are so many of us who are in survival mode. And when life feels like that, what does mindfulness look like without the mat? The props or the playlist, like the raw, the real mindfulness.
Yes, I really love this question because there can be a misunderstanding that meditation is meant for us to have a peaceful state. We must sit in a lotus position and be in this euphoria about to ascend at any moment, is maybe what the cartoon version of that might look like. And oftentimes, when we arrive to a meditation, and certainly I think many who listen can attest to this, is we still have thoughts swirling about. We might guide ourselves to sit, or we might guide ourselves to meet a conversation that's challenging. And we might have the best intentions to breathe and respond with kindness. And then sneaky triggers show up, or maybe a story that's been looping just is so persistent and it feels impossible to move through. And it's so important in these instances that we actually lean in. I've been feeling this so much. There's been a very strong collective season of grief happening, of loss of loved ones passing on, as well as loss of a certain identity or loss of a certain structure, safety that once was, or maybe a future that we thought we were building that has changed because of relationship dynamic or housing dynamic. And there's such temptation to go into old patterns, old coping mechanisms during this time. And the common ones, what right, are to really dive into substances or to overeat or to be like emotionally shopping, or we sort of like reach for things to fill the void, and really it's we're seeking to feel the ground. We want to have a certain tangible control of things that are out of our control. And what I've really been processing, particularly through this last season of grief for myself personally, is being attuned to that happening in real time and then really presencing actually to lean in to sensation because what we're being asked to do is
Mm.
to feel
Yeah.
when it feels like it's unbearable, when it's too much, it's actually not true. We have so much resilience and strength
Mm.
to meet whatever is brought to us. And when we can really approach that with sobriety without masking the emotions that are coming through, then we're really able to embody what we call the yoga practice off of the mat. This is the mindfulness in all that we do, that we can meet it with breath, we can meet it with a sense of compassion, and also
Mm.
we can meet it with this really attuned look at the teacher that is here for us. So it's usually when we're confronted with this really almost insurmountable emotion situation
Mm.
that we tend to want to retreat, but actually what we're being presented with is a portal through our next immersion of where we are being guided to. And so I think of that as divine guidance because when we are able to move through that resistance and lean into it, every single time on the other side there is this tremendous clearing where through that grit and through the darkness that
Mm.
when we are able to move through it rather than to eject, try to push under the rug, try to distract, do the things that perhaps we were used to doing, but
Mm.
actually in the mindfulness around breathing into exactly what is, right? This is how we surmount suffering. It's not to not feel the things that are going on, but actually in that deep acceptance of what is and knowing that it's all permanent, all impermanent, then we can actually move through to the other side and feel all the more stronger for it.
Wow, that's very well explained, Veronique. Very well explained. And I think, like, if you can walk us through that, those moments, specifically, um, how you kind of got into the NYC hustle kind of culture, and then you had a challenging beginning in there, but then you also discovered yoga. Like, for anyone, because I want our listeners to understand that it is not done in a single yoga session or a practice or in a single day. It takes patience, perseverance, consistency as well. And at the same time, compassion for ourselves. Not getting into that feeling of frustration that this is not working out for me because I'm not able to feel those tangible changes within me. So, how was it for you, that particular moment or moments of transition?
Yes. So this has been such a lifetime and probably many lifetimes journey. Oh God, it's so ingrained, this celebration around busyness. And if you've ever been to any kind of urban environment, if you meet someone on the street and you ask them how they're doing, more often than not, it's, oh, I'm so busy.
Yeah.
Oh, this and this and this. And like you've asked someone how they're doing, and then they have to, give the laundry list of all the things that they're doing. And it's celebrated. It's like, oh wow, yes, you're so busy. I'm so busy. Well, gotta go. I'm busy, and it's like I laugh about it because it's who said that we have to be in this doing more, get kind of culture, and yet it's in the age of Amazon and the immediacy of being able to have access in many parts of the world to
Mm,
the busy, to the and then of course now in the age of technology, right? We're so at a hyper speed that it's
mm,
actually so incredibly normalized that and I just paint that picture because when we're at that level, I really equate it to being you're running a marathon and you're in stride, like in the middle of the marathon, right? And so you don't realize that you're exhausted because you're in stride. And it's not until you're given the gift to pause, to slow down, to breathe, that you realize that you're really exhausted, that you're not able to sustain this. This is why it's, so commonly talked about of burnout and overwhelm and
mm,
feeling like we don't have enough time or resources to do all that we want to do. But really what it is our attentions are diverted in so many different directions that we have sneaky energy leaks that are depleting us of our vitality. And it's in the slowing down that we can actually more intentionally look at where our attentions are going. And we all have different fortitudes for being able to meet these challenges just in our DNA, in our upbringing, social interactions, all of those things certainly take into play. And personally, I grew up
mhm,
thinking that the to-do list was the focus. From a very young age, I watched my mother make her to-do list every morning. She would put it on a piece of paper and I would
mhm,
see her, write, empty dishwasher or, do the taxes, whatever the the to-do list were, and she would cross it off. And so I adopted this as early as age 12 and my to-do list was like sleepover at Sarah and Liza's house, like my to-do list was like fun things.
Okay.
But, I was doing it and I was celebrating, like, yeah, I did that. And then when I was living in New York, then it became like I'm auditioning for this play and then I'm going to do this photo shoot. And I was burning the candle at both ends, running my own nonprofit theater company that I started at 22. And because I had that foundation of the to-do list, there was this almost like psychic telling that I had to hurry up and get more done, almost as if I was running out of time. And so I graduated high school early, I graduated college early, I started my nonprofit early. I was like really trying to almost accelerate the timeline because I felt like there was urgency, but it was all self-made. No one told me that. And so when Hurricane Sandy came through, it was a really unusual time in New York where all of the subways shut down, all of Broadway shut down. These things almost rarely happen. Of course, it happened during COVID, maybe, one other or two other times I can think of where there was like a blackout or, different things. So very rarely would the subway shut down or would theater shut down. And so my roommate at the time and we were holed up in our little New York apartment, just like wanting to do something. It's so painful to all of us that did not have anything to do. And
mhm,
he had heard that the local yoga studio had opened in our neighborhood and did I want to go to a class? And I thought, well, okay, I had tried yoga in the past. I had gone to a yoga class in Los Angeles 10 years prior, and the teacher came up to me afterwards and said, the beginner class is actually at a different time. And I felt embarrassed and never went back. And so here we are 10 years later, and I felt like, well, I'll give it another shot. And so I showed up, and the teacher was so welcoming. It was a 90-minute class. The first 60 minutes was a vinyasa flow. It was It was slow paced, it was gentle, she was very nurturing, very maternal, and then the last 30 minutes was restorative, so, stretching on bolsters with blankets. It was so comforting to just slow down and move and be with the breath, and I just instantly felt like, "Ah, I wanna do this the rest of my days. This is so phenomenal," and I didn't know that it could be that good. And so I share that because some people who might be resistant to yoga, or maybe they tried it once and it didn't resonate, I really do think that the timing, the teacher, the style, all of these things play such an important role in our ability to be receptive of the practice, to show up just in time to meet us where we are, and really allow for us to cultivate a practice that feels resonant.
Wow. And I was just kind of not exactly picturizing, but I was able to feel like exactly how you felt. And that is really, really so lovely to know, Veronique. And um living with Lego, how how did you move from managing your appearance to relating to your body with curiosity? Because um I kind of understand that there was definitely a shift from just having those thoughts of judgment, or always like keeping a check on your body, like surveillance, to kind of having that love, that admiration or friendship with your body. So what like how was it for you?
Mm. Thank you for that. Yeah, there's such a relationship that we each get to experience in our own way of relinquishing of control. Elizabeth Gilbert famously was quoted saying that she realized she never had control, but she had anxiety, or something to that extent. Like, she realized she actually never had control to begin with. All she had was anxiety. And so there's like a gripping that happens, particularly when there's a physical something that's going on that is not normal, and yet there's no cure for it. And so there's a lot of cosmetic autoimmune diseases that are like this, where it doesn't affect your health. It's not contagious. In a lot of ways, someone who might have something that is life threatening might look at vitiligo or alopecia or something and think like, oh, well, like, you have your health, right? Like, you just have this cosmetic thing, like, who cares? But it really does play a role on the psyche. There's like a psychological thing that I can say for me, I went through, where I thought, why is there something in my body that's trying to be at war with the melanin in my skin? And I wasn't born with it. It appeared my last year of college. It was just on my eyelids. And then over the years, like through my 20s, like, there was like one spot on my finger, and then it slowly spread. Now it's over across my feet, my knees, my elbows, under my arms, my fingers. It's spread considerably over these last 20 years. And um, when I lived in New York, certainly half the year you're in winter, pretty much from October to April. And so you can kind of forget about it, because you lose your tan and you're like wearing more layers, and you're not really confronted with it. And I will say, in my 20s, when I lived in Los Angeles, I did the route of topical treatment. I went to a dermatologist. I tried laser therapy and phototherapy and ointments, and trying to treat the skin. And it wasn't until my yoga practice and understanding Ayurveda and understanding functional medicine further that I started to really look at it's actually from the inside, right? The autoimmune and really like a lot of the diseases, and this is becoming more at the forefront these days, is to really look at the root of what's happening. And a lot of it is tied to emotion. You were talking about emotion being stuck in the body or in the bones. And there's also um this signal that's transmuted or how do you say it's transmitted through the body and it manifests physically. And so that's what was happening. And I actually had sought an Ayurveda specialist in India. She had prepared herbs for me. I did a whole year-long Ayurveda program of different herbs and protocols. And ultimately, you know, the spots would fill up, but then they would empty back out. Um, and and where I am now is I've come to a certain acceptance that my skin is expressed in the way that it wants to be expressed. And I I can choose to be at war with it, and that would be causing suffering, and that would be inflammatory to my body and to my mind and my spirit. And what we've been talking about is really holding these opportunities as teachers of how can we regard the things that are out of our control and really witness them as beautiful. Because when you go into nature and you see birds and different animals with their spots and different colors, no person will look at a blue jay or some tropical bird or a leopard and think, what's wrong with that animal? Like, why does it have different colors? But, of course, in the human race, we tend to have one shade for the most part, unless, of course, you have vitiligo, and then you have, different shades. And um, when I meet a small child, usually they'll say, "Oh, what's wrong?" They'll like point out the spots, and um, because I get quite tan. My father's side is from Hungary, and so particularly in these last 7 years that I've lived in Florida, and I'm barefoot and shorts and tank top most days. It's a very hot climate. I I'm very confronted with my spots, and and ultimately, you know, I'll say it's a certain piece. I can't say, "Oh, I embrace myself fully and completely," and, it's a nonlinear journey. Sometimes I go days without thinking about it, and then sometimes I'll put on a dress and I'll just have a moment of, "Oh, like, I wish my knees didn't have these big white spots on them," you know? However, there's I think there's a certain way to be with what is with elegance, to hold whatever is here with grace, and it's a practice. And I think that this is something that we can really tune into with if if you're listening and you're going through any kind of something that is uncomfortable or you feel like it isn't the norm, there's great solace in knowing that you're not alone. We all navigate different things. They all affect us in the ways that they do. And ultimately, how can we breathe through these discomforts in a way that can continue to bring us back to to a certain kind of peace.
Absolutely. And I think you you very rightly said, that this journey, it is non-linear, and it's not about trying to prove to everyone that, this is for me, it's an inspiration and all that fluff. I think this really comes from a very practical uh, point of view, um that how sometimes, these feelings of that, this spot is like showing up, and I'm kind of feeling uncomfortable, but then it also can be carried with elegance in there. So I think this is a very, very such a practical and real, like, human take, instead of, just kind of bringing this out as an inspiration, because, we all are unique, and everyone comes with that, particular uniqueness. So that's really, really beautiful, very, like, very beautiful.
Thank you.
Um, and um your book and membership, it center on shine, which I really, really love. And off the mat, what does shining look like on a day that's honestly, I'm like, man, it's not going good? Some days it really feels like the universe is like conspiring against us, going everything wrong. But then how do we, like, keep on shining even if it's not going good?
I love this question. Yeah, because I think there can be this misconception of, oh, it's just, you know, be positive, right? There's this this messaging in the spiritual space of like, just breathe in calm and exhale your worries, and inhale positivity and exhale negativity. And it's not that at all. In fact, I really think of this vision of the heart with fractures through it.
Mm,
And so you could almost think of your heart chakra space, and it's through the heartache, through the struggle, we create fractures, you know, they're proverbial fractures on our heart, and that's
yeah.
how the light gets through, and is how we actually connect. My deepest, most powerful connections with people have been through seasons of great loss, when I felt completely wrecked and unable to pick myself up off of the floor, just feeling really, really heartbroken. That's how, in our vulnerability, we actually can harness courage to move through something. And so I really think of that as a gateway into shine, as when there is suffering, there is also a space for joy, right? Like these moments, we've been to a funeral, let's say, you find yourself laughing at a memory, right? Similarly, like you're at a wedding and you find yourself crying. I always cry at weddings. I always, you know what I mean? These things, they coexist, and I think that that's so important to really illuminate that we are meant to experience the spectrum of all human emotions. We're meant to experience anger and joy. We're meant to experience peacefulness and resentment and hurt, and everything that could possibly move through. And really that's the key, is that it has permission to move through, that you're not feeling it come in and you hold on to it. That's where the suffering turns to be, in that toxic place where we actually are holding on to being with the the darkness, so to speak, or feeling like the loneliness is like really overtaking our ability to get up and get dressed and all of these things. When we allow like a wave, when we allow whatever the emotion is to come through, we can access our shine, right? So you could think of that as your own innate radiance, your own natural ability to find vibrancy and vitality, where you feel inspired and creative and wanting to light up the world with what your soul's purpose is. When we're oriented around for others, when we're oriented in the space of really seeing all the abundance that's here, then then we're like our masters of the dimmer switch, so to speak, and we can turn the dial up on like our light, and then also the light that we feel like we're able to share. And so I think that that's really important to highlight, that it's not a masking for circumstance. It's not denying the atrocities that are happening, but rather it's, even though this is happening, even though it's a really hard time, you know what? Like I love you and I'm showing up for you. And and it's and it's so important, and then it's like you take that and then you share it with your family and so on and so on. So we start to be in a vibration that feels like we're elevating one another.
Exactly, exactly. And as you brought up, like I also like there are moments when I am absolutely like vulnerable. I cry on maybe listening to a particular song or watching a particular movie. Not the traditional, uh, but then at some moments, my inner self, it asks me to be strong. Um, it kind of demands, not demands exactly, but it kind of signals that you really have to, um, sometimes keep your emotions at bay. But then I know for the fact that there are many times when um, I wouldn't want to hold back my tears. So I think that kind of is something very nuanced, and it's actually very real. Um, we often talk around, specifically when it comes to a particular gender based energy, masculine, feminine, that, women are more expressive or they have more emotions, men don't have. But I think every one of us, we have these different levels of um, expressing emotions or feelings, processing feelings. And if I can go back, you had mentioned during the beginning of the conversation that especially in the urban places or in the cities, if we ask anyone, someone, how you are doing, first of all, um, they will kind of give us that strange look. Why are you bothered to ask me how am I doing? And secondly, either, we'll judge them if they say that they're very happy, or then, we'll sympathize with them, um, that they're not happy or they are frustrated, they're anxious, they're burned out. So it's kind of, I think, the magic happens in the middle somewhere, and we may not realize that, but I think practices like yoga, meditation, journaling, mindfulness, they all help us to realize or process that messy middle.
Yes. And it's so important that you say that, because I feel like there's a really important distinction between contentment and happiness.
Mm,
So happiness is fleeting, right? You know, your friends threw you a birthday party, you get married, you have a child, you know, these things that you can hold happiness, depending on what it is. You get an unexpected gift. However, and then there's contentment where this is a state that is your natural rhythm, so that when you do see someone and they ask how you're doing, you could, put your hand to your heart and say, I feel very grateful.
Mm.
I'm really so full with opportunity right now, and I feel very content.
Mm.
Right, that's a different frequency where, I could say the same thing, but, like, what's more commonly heard is, "I'm so busy, I'm overwhelmed," and and the situation is the same, right? But the lens in which I'm choosing to look at the situation is, I'm full rather than I'm busy.
Mm.
Right? And so the language is so important because it really affects the cells of the being, how that resonates through you. And then what you start to recognize is, okay, how do I typically answer this question? I mean, how many times in a lifetime does someone ask you, how are you? Right? And what do I tend to say? Am I the person that's like, oh, like my dog, had an accident this morning and then I spilled the coffee and then, or is it like, oh, like, you know, I'm doing great actually. Like somehow, my dog had an accident, but I cleaned it up and I just decided I was going to slow down and, I spilled the coffee and then I decided, you know what, like I'm just not going to have that cup right now. Like I'll just like go for a walk and you know what I mean? Like there's a different orientation to whatever it is, the things that are happening exteriorly, that we can process it through our own unique being and decide, you know what? I'm good. Like ultimately we're okay. Like we're gonna make it. Like I believe in us, you know? And I do think that it's orienting in communities like this where we can gather and have these conversations where we can just like find the ground and we like remember, oh right, like I'm safe, I belong, I can be in the thoughts and recognize that I'm not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, wow. And Veronique, before we wrap up, if our listeners they would like to connect with you and get a hold of your book, Shine On and Off the Mat, and also your community, what would be the easiest way?
Yes, I would love for you to connect. You can find out about all my offerings at yogawithveronique.com. And there are links to my book, to future retreats, to other offers there. My Shine community is from the stories of my book. And these are themed practices that are universal and timeless, like the practice of letting go, slowing down, these things that we'll just be forever practicing with. And there are 20-minute practices that accompany each theme. And the first is a guided meditation. The next is a vinyasa style practice, breath with movement, and then a yin stretch practice. And this new integration with the platform is that you can certainly do any of the practices on your own, and if you are seeking community, the invitation is that you could, much like on Zoom or whatever platform you're comfortable with, you can do the practices with people who you wish to have these conversations with. So, for example, we could be in this conversation while also laying down and stretching, you in your place and me in my place, and so this is the invitation to really help disrupt the sedentary as well as the loneliness epidemic that's so prevalent, that we can remember that when we do come together and we have these conversations, we just always feel so much more connected.
Exactly. Wonderful, wonderful. So, listeners, I'll have all these links in the show notes for you. So, go check out Veronique's book, Shine On and Off the Mat, and also check out her community. And if today reminded you to breathe before you perform, to soften before you sprint, then the practice is already with you. Emails, elevators, eye contact, and all. So, Vernick, thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey, your insights, your thoughts with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sana.
And to our listeners, pick any one of the ritual from this conversation. Maybe one breath before a reply, one kinder sentence to your body, to yourself, and one boundary your nervous system will thank you for. That's mindfulness off the mat and in your life. Until next time, I'm Sana, and this has been the Mindful Journey. Thank you.